And my name is Captain Alyssa Romero. I'm 27 years old, and I am a soldier in the United States Army. In my world, loyalty isn't a choice. It's the bedrock of survival. But in the stuffy wood-paneled law office in Georgetown, I was learning that the civilian world has different rules. As the will of my Uncle Ben, the only man I ever called family, was being read, the door flew open. 16 years, and there they were. My biological parents, Grant and Nadine. My mother, Nadine, swept her eyes past me as if I were a piece of furniture, looked directly at the lawyer, and let a single, ice-cold sentence fall into the room. What a waste to leave an estate like this to a girl who just plays soldier. My father, Grant, nodded in agreement, adding, "She'll have her military pension. This is for real family." They didn't know that before he died, Uncle Ben left me more than money. He left me an arsenal, and I had just been given clearance to use it. Tell me how your day is going in the comments below, good or bad. And hit that like and subscribe button if you believe family is forged in sacrifice, not just blood. This war has just begun. The battlefield wasn't a sun-scorched desert or a rain-slicked jungle. It was a conference room in Georgetown, where the air was thick with the scent of old leather, lemon polish, and unspoken grief. I sat arrow-straight in an antique chair, the starched wool of my Army service uniform a familiar armor against the chaos churning inside me. Every crease was perfect, every piece of brass on my chest polished to a high gleam. Discipline was my fortress, the one thing that hadn't been taken from me last Tuesday. Across the heavy mahogany desk sat Caleb Whitaker, my Uncle Ben's oldest friend, and his attorney. His face, usually a mask of calm legal precision, was etched with a sadness that mirrored my own. He adjusted his glasses and continued reading from the last will and testament, his voice a low, steady drone. The numbers that floated in the air were staggering: millions in assets, controlling shares in a successful defense contracting company, a portfolio that could sustain a dozen lifetimes. I processed them as they came: assets, liabilities, trusts. They were just data points on a mission brief. Uncle Ben had trained me for this, for contingency planning. He'd taught me to read a balance sheet the same way you read a topographical map. Identify the high ground, anticipate enemy movement, secure your position. But he hadn't trained me for this mission, not this soon. I felt like a newly commissioned lieutenant being handed command of a campaign I wasn't ready to lead. Sunlight filtered through the old Venetian blinds, striping the polished wood of the table in bars of light and shadow. It felt less like an office and more like an interrogation room. My heart was a dull, heavy ache in my chest, a wound that discipline couldn't bandage. Then, the door burst open. It wasn't unlocked and pushed. It was thrown open, banging against the stopper with a crack that shattered the room's somber quiet. My training took over before my mind could catch up. A jolt of adrenaline, sharp and clean, shot through my veins. My posture didn't change by a millimeter, my hands remained loosely clasped on my lap, but my body went on high alert. My senses sharpened, cataloging the new arrivals with tactical speed. Two figures stood silhouetted in the doorway, a man and a woman. My threat assessment was instantaneous. The woman, Nadine, was first through the breach. The cloying, cheap scent of her floral perfume invaded the room, a chemical weapon against the dignified scent of old paper and wood. The man, Grant, followed, a look of smug entitlement plastered on his face. They had violated the rules of engagement from the first second. You don't burst into a room like this. You knock, you wait. My eyes flicked to Caleb. The color had drained from his face, his jaw tight with disbelief. His expression confirmed my assessment. This was an ambush, an unscheduled, hostile variable. 16 years. 16 years since I'd last seen them, except for the occasional awkward, court-mandated holiday phone call. Now they were here, materializing in the worst possible moment of my life. Nadine's gaze swept the room, cataloging its value with the predatory eyes of a buzzard circling a kill. It passed over me without a flicker of recognition, as if I was a coat rack in the corner. Her focus landed squarely on Caleb. "We heard Ben passed," she said. her voice dripping with a false sympathy that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. We came to pay our respects and to discuss the arrangements. Caleb cleared his throat, regaining his composure. Grant, Nadine, this is a private reading. We're family, Grant said, stepping forward. He finally looked at me, a dismissive once-over that took in my uniform and found it lacking. She's not the only family he had. And then Nadine delivered the first volley, the words aimed not at Caleb, but at the entire premise of my existence in this room. What a waste, she sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. To leave an estate like this to a girl who just plays soldier. The words were precision-guided munitions, designed for maximum damage. They didn't just question the will, they targeted my career, my identity, my entire life's purpose. Plays soldier. The phrase was meant to diminish every grueling day at West Point, every sleepless night in the field, every sacrifice I'd made. Grant, ever her wingman, moved in to confirm the kill. Ben always was soft-hearted, he said, shaking his head as if discussing a character flaw. The girl's going to have her military pension. This, he gestured around the opulent room, this is for real family. There it was, the redefinition of terms. In their tactical brief, family was a designation they owned by blood and from which I was excluded by my choices. They had reduced my uncle's profound love for me to a simple act of foolish pity, all in front of a man who had known and respected him for 40 years. The rage that rose in me was a white-hot furnace, but on the surface, I was ice. My breathing remained even, my expression a neutral mask. I would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Just as the silence stretched, becoming a weapon in itself, a soft knock came from the door they'd left ajar. A moment later, Maria Sanchez entered, balancing a silver tray with a thermal carafe of coffee and 3 ceramic mugs. Maria, my godmother, a Gold Star wife whose husband had served with my uncle years ago. She was a second-generation Hispanic woman whose strength was a quiet, unshakable force of nature. She was the one who taught me how to make proper tortillas, who held me when I cried after my first real heartbreak, who sent me care packages filled with home-baked biscotti and letters that smelled of her kitchen. She took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. The tension, Caleb's rigid posture, the 2 hostile figures, and me. Without a word, she walked to the table, set down the tray, and then moved to stand directly beside my chair, her hand resting for a brief, warm second on my shoulder. It was a silent, powerful declaration. I am with her. Grant scoffed under his breath, a low, ugly sound. And who's this? The help? The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Maria didn't flinch. She looked directly at Grant, her gaze level and firm, and her voice, when she spoke, was as solid as bedrock. I've been part of this family for 16 years. That was it. That was the spark. Her courage lit a fire in me, burning away the shock and the doused rage. Her simple statement of fact drew the battle lines more clearly than any legal document could. Slowly, I rose to my feet. The discipline of my uniform suddenly felt less like armor and more like a mantle of command. I met the surprised, greedy eyes of the 2 people who had given me life only to abandon it. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of a grieving niece. It was the voice of a captain, cold, clear, and absolute. Maria is family, I stated, the words cutting through the tension. You 2 are strangers. The war had been declared, and as they stood there, momentarily stunned into silence, a single burning question began to form in the back of my strategic mind, a question that would fuel everything to come. After 16 years of silence, why now? The drive from Georgetown to Uncle Ben's house near Fort Belvoir was an autopilot maneuver. My hands knew the turns, my foot knew the gas, but my mind was lost in the ghost-filled territory of the past. The question from the conference room, why now, was the key that unlocked a box of memories, each one a fresh cut on an old scar. The familiar canopy of oak trees lining the George Washington Parkway blurred into green. This road was a timeline, and with every mile marker, I traveled further back. Back to a sunlit Saturday morning when I was 11. The memory is so vivid it has a taste. The phantom sweetness of pancakes I was hoping for. I remember running down the stairs of our old house in Maryland, feet slapping the hardwood. I'd woken up to a silent house, which was unusual. Grant and Nadine were many things, but quiet wasn't one of them. I'd expected to find them in the kitchen, arguing over money or nursing hangovers. Instead, I found nothing. An unnerving, echoing silence, and on the cold granite countertop, a single piece of paper torn from a legal pad. On it, in my mother's hurried script, were 7 words. 7 words that served as the final orders of my childhood. Uncle Ben will take care of you. That was it. No goodbye, no explanation, no, we love you. Just a logistical handoff, as if I were a package being rerouted. I remember the chill of the tile floor seeping into my feet, a cold that climbed up my legs and settled deep in my bones. I stood there for what felt like hours, rereading those words until they lost all meaning, the silence of the empty house screaming in my ears. It wasn't a death, but it was an erasure. I had been abandoned. Upstairs, in the back of my closet at Uncle Ben's house, is a shoebox. I call it my box of evidence. It's filled with things that carry the weight of disappointment. There's a ticket stub from my 8th grade play, Our Town. I had the lead role. I'd given them the ticket weeks in advance. The seat next to Uncle Ben and Maria remained empty. There's a birthday card from my 15th birthday that arrived 2 weeks late. The generic Hallmark message unsigned, with just a $20 bill tucked inside. Each item is a testament to the same truth. I was an afterthought. The worst was my high school graduation. The memory ambushes me as I turn onto the final street leading to Ben's house. I'd worked so hard for that day. I was valedictorian. I had a speech to give. I mailed them 2 front-row tickets. Throughout the ceremony, my eyes kept drifting to those 2 empty chairs. They were a void, a black hole that seemed to suck all the joy out of the air. As I stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of proud parents, my gaze caught on those chairs, and I had to fight to keep my voice from cracking. They called that night. The excuse was slick. "So sorry, sweetie," Nadine's voice crackled over the phone. "We got tied up in a business deal in Atlantic City. You know how it is." A business deal. I accepted it because what choice did I have? The disappointment was a familiar, bitter taste. But the lie was so much worse. A few weeks later, a friend of a friend tagged Nadine in a photo on social media. There they were, laughing, holding oversized plastic cups, a slot machine flashing behind them. The timestamp on the photo was the exact date and time of my graduation. The lie wasn't to protect me, it was to absolve them. The pain of that realization was sharper than any heartbreak. It was the understanding that I wasn't even worth an honest rejection. That wound festered and turned into a quiet anger that fueled my next decision. When I announced I was applying to West Point, that I wanted to join the Army, they didn't hide their disdain. Nadine had laughed. "Oh, another dramatic decision. You're just running away from real life, Alyssa." Grant had been more contemptuous. "The military is for people with no other options, kid. It's a noble sacrifice, I guess, if you can't make it in the real world." They saw my calling as a failure, my commitment to service as an escape. They took the one thing I was truly proud of, the path Uncle Ben had celebrated with tears in his eyes, and they twisted it into a mark of inadequacy. For years, their words became a toxic inner monologue, a whisper that no matter what I accomplished, I would never be good enough. But for every memory of them, there is a counter-memory of him, Uncle Ben. He never missed a soccer game, even in the freezing rain. He taught me how to change a tire, how to read a compass, and how to stand up straight and own my space in the world. He was the one who sat with me for hours, helping with physics homework I thought was impossible. He saw potential where they saw problems. If you've ever had someone in your life who believed in you when no one else would, a teacher, a friend, an uncle, do me a favor and hit that like button for them. And in the comments below, just type one word: mentor. It'll mean the world to know I'm not alone. I remember one afternoon, After my parents' latest dismissal had left me gutted, Uncle Ben came into my room. He didn't say much. He just handed me a simple framed print. It was a quote. The paper was thick, the font elegant. It was Theodore Roosevelt's speech, The Man in the Arena. I read the words. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. I looked up at him, my eyes blurry. He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. When people are shouting from the cheap seats, Ali, he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction, it's to remind you that you're in the arena, and that's the only place worth being. You don't need their approval. You only need your own honor. As I pull into his driveway, the engine falling silent, that memory shines like a beacon in the fog of my grief. Uncle Ben's words. They are my standing orders. This fight Grant and Nadine have started isn't about the money. It never was. It's about honor. It's about defending the legacy of the one man who was always in the arena with me. And for him, I will face any critic. I will fight any battle. My parents' brand of cruelty wasn't a sudden attack. It was a long, drawn-out siege. To understand the battle lines being drawn today, you have to understand the territory I fought for, alone, for years. My honor, as Uncle Ben called it, wasn't a gift. It was forged in the fires of their indifference. West Point was my crucible. The years there were a relentless grind of mind, body, and spirit. I pushed myself through grueling marches in the biting Hudson Valley winters, my lungs burning, my feet blistered and raw. I spent countless nights under the dim light of a desk lamp, memorizing military history and engineering formulas until the words blurred together. I learned to lead, to follow, and to push past the point where my body screamed to quit. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I did it almost entirely alone. Mail call was a daily ritual of quiet humiliation. While my classmates tore open care packages from home, giddy over homemade cookies and letters of encouragement, my cadet mailbox was a hollow, empty cavern. Week after week, nothing. The only faces I ever saw in the crowd on Parents' Weekend were Ben and Maria, their proud smiles a lighthouse in a lonely sea. I remember one Christmas during my sophomore year, I was one of a handful of cadets who stayed on campus, the academy grounds eerily quiet and blanketed in snow. On Christmas Day, I received an e-card. It was from Grant and Nadine. The generic holiday animation was accompanied by a single sentence. Hope your first year is going well. It was my second year. They couldn't even remember that. The carelessness of it, the sheer lack of effort, was a colder slap in the face than their silence. It wasn't just that they didn't care, it was that I wasn't even worth the mental energy to remember correctly. That's when I learned that you can't build a life waiting for others to lay the foundation. You have to mix the concrete and pour it yourself. Uncle Ben had learned that lesson long before me. Aegis Tactical Solutions, the company now at the center of this storm, wasn't some inherited empire. It was born in the sweat and sawdust of his two-car garage. I remember coming home from school as a teenager and finding him hunched over a workbench, surrounded by a chaotic mess of schematics, wires, and half-assembled prototypes. The air would smell of soldering flux and burnt coffee. He'd work late into the night, fueled by a relentless vision and a belief that he could build something better, something that would protect soldiers like him. He didn't build it alone. I was his unofficial, unpaid apprentice. I helped him organize invoices, pack early prototypes into cardboard boxes, and listen as he rehearsed his pitches to investors who didn't yet see what he saw. I watched him pour every dollar he had, every ounce of his energy, into that company. I saw the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes and the pride that burned in them when a design finally worked. Aegis wasn't just a number on a will, it was a living testament to his sacrifice. It was our family's true legacy, built with our own hands. In the garage, amidst the tools and blueprints, hung a poster. It was an old, iconic one from World War II, Rosie the Riveter, flexing her bicep under the words, "We can do it." One day, he saw me looking at it. "You've got that in you, Ali," he'd said, tapping his finger on Rosie's determined face. That's strength. Don't you ever let anyone make you doubt it. 3 days after the ambush in Caleb's office, my own strength was put to the test. They showed up at the house, unannounced. My internal alarm bells screamed, but my training kept me calm. Information is ammunition. I let them in, my face a neutral mask, my senses on high alert. They walked through the house my uncle had loved, the house he had filled with warmth and laughter, and they saw none of it. Their eyes weren't filled with nostalgia. They were the cold, calculating eyes of appraisers. They moved from room to room, their presence a desecration. This painting could be worth a bit, Nadine commented, tapping a manicured nail against the frame of a landscape Ben had bought on a trip to Wyoming. What kind of security system did he have? Grant asked, peering out a window toward the street. Is it monitored? They didn't share a single memory. They didn't say, I remember when Ben bought this chair, or he always loved this view. They saw only price tags. Every object was an asset, every room a line item on a ledger they were mentally preparing. They were stripping the soul from my home, right in front of me. Finally, in the study, surrounded by Ben's books and awards, Grant dropped the pretense. He turned to me, his expression direct and devoid of emotion. So, how much is Aegis actually worth? We're going to need a number to calculate our share. The shamelessness of it took my breath away. Our share. As if they had spent a single sleepless night worrying about its future. As if their sweat was mixed into its foundation. Before I could answer, Nadine placed a sleek leather briefcase on Ben's desk and clicked it open. Inside, I saw stacks of paper, neatly organized with colored tabs, financial statements, asset reports, a complete and detailed breakdown of my uncle's entire estate. A cold dread washed over me. Where did you get this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Nadine shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture. We have a right to know, she said, her tone implying I was foolish to even question it. We are your parents, after all. They were using blood as a battering ram, a birthright they had abdicated long ago, now reclaimed as a tool for extortion. This wasn't a spontaneous act of greedy opportunism. The detailed reports, the legal-style organization, the briefcase, it all pointed to a chilling conclusion. This was a pre-planned, coordinated campaign. They had been preparing for this. They had been waiting for him to die. My phone, sitting on the desk beside the briefcase, suddenly buzzed. The screen lit up. It was a new email. My eyes dropped to the notification, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. The sender was a name I didn't recognize. Martin Keene, Keene Legal, LLC. The subject line was a declaration of war. Re, the estate of Benjamin Thomas. The email notification on my phone was a digital grenade, and the confrontation in my uncle's study was its blast radius. Faced with the evidence of their premeditation, the briefcase, the reports, Grant and Nadine dropped all pretense. They went on the offensive. Nadine, sensing her advantage, tried to justify their claim. We have rights, Alyssa. Legal rights. She pulled a folded, yellowed document from her briefcase. It was an old court filing. My eyes scanned the legalese until a single number jumped out, circled in red ink. $1,300. We were in a difficult financial situation, Nadine explained, her tone devoid of shame, as if detailing a corporate merger. Ben knew that. He offered to clear our debts. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. In exchange, we agreed to sign over full parental rights. It was a good deal for everyone involved. A good deal. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. The world tilted on its axis. All the pain of the last 16 years, the abandonment, the loneliness, the constant feeling of being second best, was suddenly distilled into a single, transactional number. $13,500. That was my price. That was the value they had placed on their only child. The rage, the grief, all of it evaporated, leaving a chilling, hollow void. I looked at these two people, my creators, and felt nothing. You sold me, I said. The words were flat, lifeless, a statement of fact. The finality in my voice must have unnerved them because Grant's strategy shifted. He stepped forward, his face twisting into a mask of victimhood. "We'll take this to court," he threatened. "We'll tell the judge Ben coerced us. We'll tell them our own daughter turned her back on us when we needed her most." His threat was interrupted by a gentle knock at the front door. A moment later, Maria Sanchez appeared in the doorway of the study, a beacon of warmth in the toxic air. She was holding a large casserole dish, and the rich, comforting aroma of garlic, oregano, and baked tomatoes filled the house. Her timing was a miracle. Her presence, an act of grace. She took one look at the scene: my shell-shocked face, the open briefcase, the predatory stances of Grant and Nadine, and understood everything. The sight of her simple, profound act of care, seemed to break their offensive. Grant's threat died in his throat. Nadine snapped her briefcase shut. Their narrative of wronged parents couldn't survive the quiet dignity of a woman holding a homemade lasagna. They muttered a few hasty excuses and retreated, leaving their threats hanging in the air. The moment their car pulled away, my phone rang. It was Caleb, his voice charged with a new urgency. "Allie, you need to get to my office. Now," he said. "I was going through Ben's personal safe. I found something. Something he called his insurance file." 20 minutes later, I was back in the Georgetown conference room. Caleb heaved a heavy gray metal lockbox onto the mahogany desk. It landed with a solid, definitive thud. "He left specific instructions," Caleb said. "This was to be opened only by you, and only if Grant and Nadine made a formal claim against the estate." My hand trembled as I turned the key. The lid opened with a soft hiss. Inside, there was no money. There was something far more valuable. It was a meticulously organized collection of documents, a history of my parents' greed. There were photocopies of dozens of checks Ben had written to them over the years, annotated with the date and purpose. Car repairs, medical bills. There were thumb drives. Caleb plugged one into his laptop. We listened as my father's voice, wheedling and then demanding, filled the room, asking for a loan that was never repaid. There was a detailed report from a private investigator, complete with photographs documenting their frequent trips to casinos in Atlantic City and Charlestown. Trips that coincided with their calls to Ben pleading poverty. He had known. All this time my uncle had known, and he had quietly, patiently built a fortress to protect me. Tucked in the corner of the box was an old, faded photograph. It was of a younger Uncle Ben, his arm slung around another soldier. On the back, in Ben's block printing, Sergeant Miguel Sanchez, Da Nang, 1971. Brothers aren't always born of the same blood. It was Maria's father. My breath caught. This bond, this real family, was a legacy forged in war. At the very bottom lay a single manila envelope, sealed with a circle of red wax. My name was written on the front. With shaking fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Ali," it began. "If you are reading this, then the day I feared has come. I am sorry you have to face this, but I am not sorry for the life we built. Know this first. You were never a burden. You were the greatest gift of my life. I knew your parents' character, and so I prepared. I hoped this file would gather dust, but hope is not a strategy. They will try to use your love for me as a weapon against you. They will try to paint my love for you as a weakness. Do not let them. The documents in this box are not for revenge, they are for the truth. In our world, the truth is the highest ground. Take it and hold it. Remember what I taught you. Honor isn't silently enduring injustice. Honor is fighting for what's right, for the truth, and for the people you love. You are the commander of my legacy now. Defend it. You are strong enough. You always have been." All my love, Ben. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming, fierce love. He saw it all coming. He had been my silent guardian, my strategist, even now. He hadn't just left me an inheritance. He had left me an armed fortress, a loyal team, and one final direct order: fight and win. Caleb looked at me, a slow, respectful smile spreading across his face as I refolded the letter. "Ben didn't just leave you a will, Ali," he said, his voice full of awe. "He left you a complete battle plan." Uncle Ben's battle plan had changed everything. The grief and rage that had clouded my judgment began to recede, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of a mission. The next morning, Caleb Whitaker's conference room no longer felt like a lawyer's office. It had become a tactical operations center, a war room. I arrived before sunrise, dressed not in my uniform, but in practical civilian clothes. Dark jeans, a fitted black sweater, boots. But my bearing was all military. I was in command now. We commandeered Caleb's largest whiteboard. Within an hour, it was covered in a web of diagrams, timelines, and courses of action, the colored markers like grease pencils on a battlefield map. Maria was there too, a quiet, steadfast presence, keeping a fresh pot of coffee brewing, our logistical anchor. Together, the three of us dissected Ben's insurance file. It was more than just evidence, it was a complete narrative of decades of manipulation and greed. We plotted every check, every recorded phone call, every casino trip on a timeline that stretched back to my childhood. Seeing it all laid out, the systematic nature of their deception was undeniable. This wasn't a series of mistakes, it was a long-term operation. The anger I felt was no longer a hot personal wound, it was a cold, strategic asset. We have them on financial dependency, moral character, and a pattern of deceit, I summarized, tapping a red marker against a key date on the board. Our defense is solid. Caleb, who had been pacing while on a phone call with one of his contacts in the DC legal community, hung up. His face was grim. Our defense may need to be stronger. I just got new intel on their legal counsel. He walked to the board. They've hired Martin Keene. The name didn't mean anything to me, but I saw Maria's hand tighten around her coffee mug. Caleb saw my questioning look and elaborated. Keene is a shark, one of the most ruthless litigators in the city. His specialty isn't winning on merit, it's winning by attrition. His strategy is scorched earth. He files so many motions, subpoenas so many witnesses, and leaks so much disinformation to the press that the other side either runs out of money or surrenders from sheer exhaustion. This was a significant escalation. They weren't just coming with a flimsy claim, they were coming with a high-priced mercenary. It gets worse, Caleb continued, his voice low. Keene and Aegis have a history. He represented a competitor in a contract dispute about 8 years ago. Ben won, decisively, humiliated Keene in court. This isn't just a job for him, Ali, it's personal. I processed the new information. So, the enemy has upgraded their weapons, and their commander has a personal vendetta. Exactly, Caleb affirmed. My mind raced, reevaluating the battlefield. Keene's involvement meant they would be looking for any weakness, any vulnerability to exploit. I felt a prickle of unease, the instinct of a soldier sensing a hidden sniper. I scanned our own defensive lines, looking for a blind spot. Then Caleb pointed to a section of the will we had highlighted earlier. There's one other piece we need to consider, he said, his finger resting on a single clause. The codicil Ben added 5 years ago. It states that in the event you are unable or unwilling to execute the will, the executorship passes not to the bank, but to a secondary appointee. He looked from the document to Maria. It passes to you, Maria. The air in the room went still. It was a detail I'd overlooked, a minor contingency. But in the context of an enemy like Martin Keene, it wasn't minor at all. It was a fatal flaw in my strategy. In an instant, I saw my mistake with chilling clarity. I had been so focused on defending myself and my uncle's legacy that I had failed to secure my flanks. In warfare, a smart enemy doesn't launch a frontal assault on a fortified position. They probe for the weakest point, they attack the soft target, and Maria, with her innate goodness, her trusting nature, and her profound kindness, was the soft target. They wouldn't come after me, a decorated army captain with a spotless record. That was a high-risk, low-reward maneuver. Instead, they would go after her. They would try to discredit her, to slander her character, to paint her as a manipulative caregiver who had influenced an old man. They would tear her life apart in a public court, not to win, but simply to force me into a settlement to make it stop. A wave of cold fear, sharper and more potent than any I had felt for myself, washed over me. I had seen what the ugly side of the world could do to good people. Maria had already lost a husband to one war. I would be damned if she became a casualty in mine. For the past week, I'd noticed a dark sedan, a late model Ford, parked down the street from Maria's house on several occasions. At the time, I dismissed it as coincidence, but now with this new intel, it felt like surveillance. My training in reconnaissance kicked in. The last time I saw it, I'd discreetly taken a few pictures with my phone, capturing the license plate. On a hunch, I forwarded the images to Caleb. "Can your PI run this plate?" "No," I said aloud, my voice cutting through the tense silence. It came out harder than I intended, a commander's edict. They will not touch her. The fear was gone, burned away by a ferocious, protective resolve. I looked at Maria, at her worried face, and I saw not a weak link, but a member of my unit. And there is a creed, a sacred vow, that is drilled into every soldier from the first day of basic training. We never leave a soldier behind. My mission parameters had just expanded. This was no longer just my fight. I turned to Caleb, my voice now calm and authoritative. Your priority one is to build a legal firewall around Maria, effective immediately. I want character depositions from her friends, her neighbors, anyone and everyone who can testify to her integrity. Proactively establish her reputation before they have a chance to attack it. Caleb nodded, already grabbing a legal pad. I was no longer a grieving niece defending an inheritance. I was a commander, responsible for the lives and safety of my people. I had been planning a defense, but a good defense is not enough. Now, we needed a counter-offensive. The enemy had made a critical error. They had threatened my family, my real family. And in doing so, they had given me a new, crystal-clear objective. But as I stood there, mapping out our next move, the strategic question echoed in my mind, a problem that needed an immediate solution. They were already watching her. They were preparing their attack. How do I protect my flank? There's a quote from General George S. Patton that they drill into you at West Point. Never let the enemy pick the battleground. For the past week, I'd been reacting, defending, and absorbing blows. It was time to stop reacting and start commanding. It was time to force them to fight on my terrain. I called Caleb with new orders. Set up a meeting, I told him, my voice calm and decisive. With Grant, Nadine, and their lawyer, Martin Keene, I want it here. At Aegis headquarters, tomorrow at 900 hours. It was a strategic power play. No more emotional confrontations in the personal space of my uncle's home. No more ambushes in neutral territory. This meeting would take place in my fortress, the house that Ben and I built. A state-of-the-art facility humming with the energy of innovation and success. I was taking the high ground. The next morning, I didn't wear my army uniform. That uniform was a symbol of my service, of my oath to my country. This fight was personal, and it required a different kind of armor. I chose a perfectly tailored navy blue business suit, a crisp white shirt, and heels that clicked with authority on the polished concrete floors. My hair was pulled back into a tight, severe bun. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a grieving niece. I saw the CEO. I had them brought to the main executive conference room. It was a glass box with one wall offering a panoramic view of the Aegis manufacturing floor below. Engineers in lab coats moved with quiet purpose, assembling the advanced tactical gear that my uncle had designed. The room itself was a testament to our success, a symbol of everything they were trying to steal. I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the long boardroom table, my hands resting lightly on the back of the chairman's seat. I was a general reviewing the terrain before an engagement. At precisely 900, the door opened. Martin Keene entered first, oozing the smug confidence of a man who rarely loses. Grant and Nadine followed, looking small and out of place amidst the sleek, modern technology. They were dressed for a funeral, but they had walked into a corporate execution. I didn't invite them to sit. I let them stand in the center of the room, forcing them to look up at me. I let the silence stretch, a tactical pause to establish dominance. Keene's smile faltered slightly. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice even, cold, and stripped of all emotion. "I summoned this meeting to present an intelligence briefing that I believe you will find illuminating." I clicked a remote. The large monitor on the wall, usually reserved for financial projections and design schematics, flickered to life. I presented Ben's insurance file, not as a daughter's painful memories, but as a CEO's quarterly report on corporate malfeasance. Asset 1, I stated, my voice clinical. A certified copy of a legal document filed in the state of Maryland 16 years ago. The scanned image of the parental rights agreement appeared on the screen, the $13,500 figure highlighted in a red circle. As you can see, all parental rights were legally and permanently severed in exchange for a one-time financial settlement. Nadine flinched. Grant stared at his shoes. Keen's face remained a stony mask, but I saw a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Asset 2, I continued, clicking the remote again. A copy of a temporary restraining order filed by my uncle in 2021, following a series of harassing phone calls. This was a new piece of intel, something Ben had filed quietly without telling me. A low gasp escaped Nadine's lips. Keen's jaw tightened. This wasn't in their briefing. His case was already showing cracks. And finally, Asset 3, a piece of audio surveillance. I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. This is a recording of a call Mr. Grant Romero made to Colonel Benjamin Thomas 6 months before his death. I pressed play. Grant's voice, amplified by the room's speakers, filled the dead silence. It was whiny, threatening, and pathetic. If you don't give me more money, Ben, I swear I'll tell the kid how you paid to get rid of us. I'll wreck that hero image she has of you. I'll ruin everything. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a case imploding. Nadine's face was ashen. Grant looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Martin Keen's professional facade finally crumbled. The smugness was gone, replaced by the barely concealed fury of a man who has been led into a perfectly executed ambush. He knew in that moment that he had no case. He had nothing but the lies of two desperate, greedy people. Grant, in a last, pathetic act of desperation, took a step towards me, his hand outstretched in a pleading gesture. "Allie," he stammered, his voice weak. "Allie, you don't understand." I took one sharp, deliberate step back, creating a clear, unbreachable distance between us. My authority, my control, was absolute. "Don't call me that name," I commanded. My voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the air like a razor. "That name belongs to a little girl you sold. For you, it's Captain Romero. And as the acting CEO of this company, I can tell you that my uncle taught me two things: honor and loyalty. Those are concepts I don't expect you to understand." I looked past them, toward the door where two of my security staff had quietly appeared. "Now," I said, my voice dropping to a dismissive whisper, "get out of my facility." Have you ever had to stand up for yourself and draw a line in the sand with someone? If you have, hit that like button to show your support. And in the comments below, simply write, "I did it." Let's create a community of people who refuse to be silent. They were defeated, utterly and completely. As my security team escorted them out, Grant shot one last hateful look over his shoulder. "This isn't over," he snarled. The threat was hollow, the desperate cry of a beaten man. I stood there for a long moment after they were gone, the silence of the room a welcome relief. A small, temporary victory. But as I turned to leave, my phone chimed. I pulled it from my pocket. It was a new email, the sender stamped with the official seal of the D.C. Superior Court. The subject line was a cold slap of reality. Summons to appear, Romero v. Romero. The battle was over. The war had just officially begun. My brief moment of victory at Aegis headquarters was just that. Brief. Martin Keen did not retreat to lick his wounds. He counterattacked with overwhelming force. The summons I received was just the first shell in a full-scale bombardment. Within hours, a process server was at my door, handing me a thick manila envelope. It was Keen's official petition to the court. As Caleb read it over the phone, his voice grew tighter with every word. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. Not only did it formally accuse me of exerting undue influence over a vulnerable old man, but it also filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all of Aegis's assets, effective immediately. The justification was a brutal character assassination. Keen's filing painted me as a mentally unstable combat veteran, implying my military service had left me volatile and untrustworthy. He argued that I was a high risk to mismanage and dissipate the company's assets out of sheer incompetence or spite. It was a direct strike at our financial jugular, an attempt to paralyze the company, sow panic among our employees and shareholders, and force me to capitulate. My phone lit up with a call from our CFO. The attack was already working, but that was only the first front. Almost simultaneously, Keen opened a second, a psychological operations campaign. An article appeared on a sleazy DC political gossip blog, the kind that thrives on scandal and innuendo. The headline was a cannonball of slander designed for maximum damage and viral spread. PTSD-stricken Army captain in million-dollar battle over estate with ailing parents? The article was a toxic cocktail of half-truths and anonymous sources. A source close to the family described my parents as devastated and concerned for their daughter's erratic behavior. Another insider questioned my fitness to run a sensitive defense company, hinting that my combat experience had left me unpredictable. It was a textbook smear, expertly crafted to turn my greatest source of pride, my military service, into a weapon against me. My phone began to melt down. First, it was our business partners, their voices tight with feigned concern. Then came a call from a liaison at the Pentagon, a terse, formal inquiry about the unfortunate press and its potential impact on our security clearances. My reputation, the most valuable currency an officer possesses, was being systematically dismantled in the public square. Every call was a new shrapnel wound. The two attacks, legal and public, were perfectly synchronized, designed to overwhelm and disorient. Caleb called an emergency meeting back at the Tausi. He's trying to isolate you, Ali, professionally and personally. We have to fight back on both fronts. The court had scheduled the emergency hearing for the injunction in 48 hours. It was a tight deadline, but manageable. We began to mobilize our team, me, Caleb, and a pale but determined Maria, diving into a frantic race against the clock. We started outlining our counter-arguments, pulling the key evidence from Ben's insurance file, preparing our defense. Just as we were finding our rhythm, Keen launched his final decisive strike. It was an attack not on my assets or my reputation, but on time itself. Caleb's paralegal burst into the conference room, his face white. Judge approved Keen's motion to expedite, he announced, breathless. He argued that the risk of asset destruction was imminent and severe. The hearing is no longer Friday. It's been moved up. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7:20 p.m. Moved up to when? I asked. Tomorrow morning, the paralegal said, his voice cracking. 8 a.m. The air was sucked out of the room. 48 hours had just been compressed to less than 13. We weren't just outgunned, we were being outmaneuvered on a temporal level. Caleb slammed his hand down on the table, a rare display of anger. The pages of a law book fluttered in the air. Damn it, he swore, his voice a low growl of furious disbelief. It's a blitzkrieg, a classic German blitzkrieg. He was right. It was a lightning war. A coordinated, multi-pronged assault of overwhelming speed and force, designed to induce shock, shatter morale, and force a swift surrender before we could even mount a proper defense. And it was working. The atmosphere in our war room instantly changed. The focused energy curdled into something close to panic. Caleb was pacing furiously, muttering about legal precedents and impossible deadlines. Maria sat silently, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a mask of worry. The confident team from that morning was gone, replaced by 3 people staring into the abyss of a fight they couldn't possibly win in time. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that seemed to press down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. We were cornered, exhausted, and running out of time. It was in that moment of near-total despair that something inside me shifted. The noise, the panic, the ringing phones. It all seemed to fade away, replaced by a strange, profound calm. I had been in situations like this before. I had been under enemy fire, with chaos erupting all around me, where a single, clear-headed decision could mean the difference between life and death. My training took over. The chaos didn't break me, it centered me. Slowly, I stood up. My movement was deliberate, and it commanded the room's attention. Caleb stopped pacing. Maria looked up at me. I looked at my team, my family. Their faces were etched with fear and exhaustion, but also with a defiant loyalty that mirrored my own. "All right," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the panic with the sharp, clear authority of a battlefield command. The officer in me was now in full control. Nobody sleeps tonight. I walked to the whiteboard, picked up a black marker, and erased our frantic defensive scribbles. "They want a lightning war," I said, my back to them, my voice ringing with a newfound iron resolve. "We're going to give them a perfect ambush." The DC Superior Courtroom was cold, formal, and utterly impartial. It was the perfect battlefield for the end of this war. The air was heavy with the scent of floor wax and old law books. We sat at the respondents' table, me, Caleb, and Maria. I wore my full Army service uniform, the Class A's. It wasn't a costume, it was a statement. It was the uniform of the person they had tried to slander. Across the aisle, at the petitioner's table, sat Grant, Nadine, and a grim-faced Martin Keene. The smug confidence he'd worn at Aegis was back, tailored to fit the theatricality of the courtroom. They looked sure of their victory. The judge entered. She was an older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that commanded immediate respect. Judge Eleanor Vance. I had looked her up. A reputation for being tough, fair, and having zero patience for theatrics. Keene began his performance. He strode to the center of the room, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. He painted a masterful, tragic story for the court. A story of two loving, elderly parents, cast aside by their only daughter. A daughter, he argued, whose distinguished military service had tragically left her emotionally scarred and prone to paranoia. He twisted my discipline into rigidity, my composure into emotional detachment. He used the language of therapy as a weapon, suggesting my hypervigilance, a soldier's asset, was a symptom of instability. He was trying to turn my strength into a disease. "This isn't about greed, Your Honor," Keene concluded, his voice dripping with false empathy. "It's about concern. Concern that a decorated but deeply troubled young woman is not fit to manage such a complex estate, and that her dear, departed uncle was not in a sound state of mind when he left it to her." Through it all, I remained perfectly still. I did not fidget. I did not react. I kept my eyes fixed on Judge Vance, my posture ramrod straight. I let his words wash over me, trusting the battle plan. When it was Caleb's turn, his approach was the complete opposite. He didn't pace. He didn't perform. He stood at our table and presented facts. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and methodical. "We will not waste the court's time debating amateur psychology. We will present the facts." One by one, he dismantled Keene's entire narrative. He presented the certified copy of the Parental Rights Agreement. Exhibit A, a document showing the petitioners legally relinquished all parental claims 16 years ago for financial consideration. He presented the financial statements from Ben's file. Exhibit B, a summary of payments made by Colonel Thomas to the petitioners over the last decade, totaling over $90,000, demonstrating a clear pattern of financial dependency, not familial support. He presented the 2021 restraining order. Exhibit C, a court order filed by Colonel Thomas himself, demanding the petitioners cease all contact due to harassment. With each exhibit, I saw the confidence drain from Martin Keene's face like air from a punctured tire. Judge Vance listened intently, her expression unreadable, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The foundation of their case was turning to dust before our eyes. Then Caleb prepared the final blow. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to play a short audio recording. It is a voicemail left by the petitioner, Mr. Grant Romero, on Colonel Thomas's phone approximately 6 months ago." Keene shot to his feet. "Objection! Hearsay! Lack of foundation." Overruled, Mr. Keene, the judge said flatly, her eyes narrowing. I want to hear this. Proceed, Mr. Whitaker. Caleb pressed a button on his laptop. A hush fell over the courtroom. And then, Grant's voice, my father's voice, filled the cold, formal space. It was the same recording from Ben's file, but here, under the weight of the court's authority, it sounded infinitely more damning. If you don't give me more money, Ben, I swear I'll tell the kid how you paid to get rid of us. I'll wreck that hero image she has of you. I'll ruin everything. The voice message ended, but the words hung in the air. A toxic, indelible stain. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was on Grant. He had shrunk in his chair, his face buried in his hands. Nadine was pale as a ghost, her mouth slightly agape in horror. Martin Keene slowly sank back into his seat, utterly defeated. The game was over. Judge Vance didn't need to hear another word. She removed her glasses, her gaze shifting from the evidence to Grant and Nadine. The look she gave them was one of pure, undisguised contempt. Her judgment was swift and merciless, each word a hammer blow of justice. Mr. Keene, she began, her voice cold as steel. Your emergency petition to freeze the assets of Aegis Tactical Solutions based on the demonstrably false claim of Captain Romero's instability is hereby denied, with prejudice. The phrase, with prejudice, landed like a cannon shot. It meant they could never, ever bring this claim again. Furthermore, she continued, her eyes still locked on my parents, the no contest clause in Colonel Thomas's will is in full effect. By bringing this frivolous and malicious lawsuit, you have forfeited any and all claims to the estate, now and forever. She wasn't finished. This court finds that your actions constitute a gross abuse of the legal process. Therefore, you, the petitioners, are ordered to pay for all of Captain Romero's legal fees related to this matter. And then, the final, crushing blow. Finally, based on the clear and disturbing evidence of harassment and blackmail presented here today, this court is issuing a permanent restraining order. Grant and Nadine Romero are forbidden from coming within 1,000 yards of Captain Alyssa Romero, Mrs. Maria Sanchez, their residences, and their place of employment at Aegis Tactical Solutions. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. She picked up her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Bang! The sound of the gavel was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It wasn't wood hitting wood. It was the sound of 16 years of pain being brought to an end. It was the sound of a prison door swinging open. It was the thunder of justice. We walked out of the courtroom and into the bright sunlight of the courthouse steps. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a small group of people waiting for us. Employees from Aegis, a few veterans from the local VFW post, and at the front of the group was Sergeant Frank Miller, a retired master sergeant who worked as a foreman on our assembly line. Ben had helped him get back on his feet after a rough patch years ago. A local news reporter who had likely been tipped off by Keene's office rushed forward and stuck a microphone in his face. Sir, why are you here today? Frank, a man of few words, looked straight into the camera, his eyes unwavering. Colonel Thomas saved my life, he said, his voice thick with emotion. His daughter carries his honor. We weren't going to let anyone tarnish that. He turned to me and gave me a slow, respectful nod. In that moment, surrounded by my true family, I finally understood. My uncle hadn't just left me a company. He had left me a community, an army. Victory doesn't always feel like a celebration. Sometimes it feels like the dead quiet after a battle, when the adrenaline fades and all you're left with is the deafening silence and the bone-deep exhaustion of survival. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the blinding DC sunlight, I didn't feel a rush of triumph. What I felt was heavy, a profound, crushing weariness, as if I had just completed a 30-mile forced march with a full rucksack. The small crowd of Aegis employees and veterans waiting on the steps didn't cheer. They simply began to applaud, a quiet, rolling wave of respect that was more moving than any shout of victory. Maria enveloped me in a fierce hug, her shoulders shaking with silent, relieved sobs. I held onto her, drawing strength from the one person who had been in the trenches with me from the start. We had won. The war was over. But the scars of the campaign remained. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was a single cream-colored envelope, the handwriting instantly recognizable as Nadine's. I opened it with a strange sense of detachment. Inside was a handwritten note full of hollow, cliché-ridden phrases about deep regret and making terrible mistakes. She begged for a second chance, for an opportunity to rebuild our family. The letter was all about her pain, her remorse. Grant's name was never mentioned. I read the words, and for the first time in my life, when it came to her, I felt nothing. No anger, no surge of pain, not even a flicker of the old desperate hope that she might one day change. All I felt was a distant, clinical pity for a woman so emotionally bankrupt that this was the best she could offer. I folded the letter and set it on the desk. I didn't need to write back. I didn't need to offer forgiveness or condemnation. I finally understood what forgiveness really was. It wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about absolving them of their sins or pretending the past didn't happen. Forgiveness was a unilateral act of self-preservation. It was about putting down the heavy burden of my own hatred, not for their sake, but for mine. I was letting go, not so they could be free, but so I could. The permanent restraining order was the boundary. My indifference was the peace. Later that week, I found myself in my uncle's office at Aegis. It was the first time I'd been able to sit in his chair without feeling overwhelmed by grief. The scent of his pipe tobacco still lingered faintly in the air. My eyes fell on his official portrait on the wall. Colonel Benjamin Thomas, his gaze firm and kind, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I looked at his portrait and then at the gray metal lockbox, the insurance file, which now sat on the corner of his desk. I finally understood the true nature of the legacy he had left me. It wasn't the millions in the bank or the controlling shares of the company. His real legacy was that box. It was a legacy of truth. Uncle Ben wasn't a particularly religious man, but he had a deep respect for timeless wisdom. He had once quoted a line from the Bible to me, a line that had stuck with me ever since. "You will know the truth," he'd said, "and the truth will set you free." For years, I thought freedom meant escaping my past. But as I looked at that box, I realized Ben's definition was different. Freedom wasn't about escaping the truth, it was about accepting it, documenting it, and, when necessary, deploying it as your shield. He had spent years quietly compiling a fortress of facts, not out of spite, but because he knew that the best, the only, weapon against a lifetime of lies is a well-documented truth. He had given me my freedom by giving me the undeniable truth of my own story. And a legacy that powerful could not be allowed to simply gather dust in a safe. It had to be put to work. It had to become a living thing. An idea began to form, a sense of purpose so clear and bright it felt like a new dawn. I picked up the phone and called a meeting with the two other members of my command staff, Caleb and Maria. They met me in the office that evening. I got straight to the point. "I want to start a foundation," I said, the words feeling more right than anything I'd ever said. "In Ben's name, the Colonel Benjamin Thomas Foundation." Caleb and Maria looked at me, their expressions curious, waiting. "All this time," I continued, my voice growing stronger with conviction, "we had Ben's insurance file. It was our secret weapon. It's the reason we won." But as I was sitting here, I couldn't stop thinking. What about the ones who don't have a Ben Thomas in their corner? What about the soldiers, the sailors, the airmen who find themselves trapped in complex, toxic family disputes over estates, or custody, or finances, and they have no one to help them navigate it? I leaned forward, the mission crystallizing in my mind. The foundation will provide pro bono legal support for service members and their families who are facing these kinds of battles. It will fund the investigators, the lawyers, the support staff they need to fight back. We will help them build their own insurance files. In that moment, the last of the grief and anger transformed into something new. It became fuel. My pain was no longer a wound. It was the foundation stone of a new mission. This was how I would honor him. I wouldn't just protect the legacy he had left me, I would expand it. I would take the shield he had built for one person and turn it into an arsenal for many. We would build a new kind of fortress, not of steel and concrete, but of truth and justice. A beacon for soldiers fighting battles far from any foreign shore. 6 months after the sound of the judge's gavel, I found myself standing on a different kind of stage. It was in a grand ballroom in San Diego, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, at a major national defense conference. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of the nation's top military and industry leaders. I was there to accept the annual Breakthrough Leader Award. I wore an elegant, dark blue gown, but my posture was still a soldier's. Shoulders back, chin up, a quiet confidence forged in crucibles far tougher than this. When I stepped up to the podium, I didn't talk much about Aegis's latest drone technology or our quarterly growth, which had been record-breaking. Instead, I talked about loyalty. I talked about the sacred duty of a commander to protect their unit, whether that unit is a platoon in the field or a team of engineers in a lab. I talked about the difference between a title and true leadership. And at the end, I held up the Crystal Award, letting it catch the light. There's only one leader this award truly belongs to, I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing through the silent ballroom. A man who taught me that the highest form of leadership is service, and the purest form of strength is honor. I accept this on behalf of my mentor, my commander, and my father, the late Colonel Benjamin Thomas. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. For the first time, standing in the spotlight didn't feel like an interrogation. It felt like coming home. Ben's legacy, I had learned, was not a static thing to be guarded. It was a living thing, meant to be grown. And it was growing, not just at Aegis, but in a small, unassuming office in Arlington, Virginia. The sign on the door was simple: the Colonel Benjamin Thomas Foundation. Inside, the atmosphere was one of quiet purpose. On any given day, you could find Maria, now the Foundation's executive director, sitting with a young Marine, her voice a comforting balm as he nervously explained a bitter custody battle. You could find Caleb, the Foundation's chief legal counsel, sketching out a strategy on a whiteboard, his face set with the same fierce determination he'd shown for me. In its first 6 months, the Foundation had already provided legal aid to over a dozen military families, helping them build their own insurance files against injustice. Ben's battle plan had become a beacon. His legacy was alive, and it was fighting. As for me, I had finally found a rhythm I never thought possible. I had found balance. I still ran Aegis with the discipline of a commanding officer, but I also made time for peace. I discovered a love for hiking the rugged trails of Shenandoah National Park, the silence of the mountains, a welcome antidote to the noise of my past. Sunday evenings were sacred, reserved for dinner at Maria's house, the comforting chaos of her grandchildren, a reminder of what real family looks and sounds like. The ghosts of Grant and Nadine no longer haunted me. They had become what they always truly were: strangers. Footnotes in a story that was now entirely my own. The abandoned little girl was gone, and in her place stood a commander, not just of a company or a platoon, but of her own life, her own happiness, her own peace. Last week, on a crisp autumn morning, I found myself standing alone on the National Mall. I walked along the quiet, polished black granite of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the names of the fallen a stark, silent testament to a generation's sacrifice. My fingers traced the cool, carved letters until I found the one I was looking for: Miguel R. Sanchez, Maria's father. The man in the photograph, his arms slung around my uncle in a jungle far from home. I didn't stand there to mourn a man I'd never met. I stood there in gratitude, to honor the origin point of my chosen family, a bond of brotherhood forged in war that had reached across decades to save me. I looked up from the wall, my gaze traveling across the reflecting pool to the Lincoln Memorial, majestic and enduring in the soft morning light. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the city, a new day dawning. Standing there, in the quiet heart of the nation I had sworn to serve, the final lesson of my long war settled into place. I had learned that family is not defined by the blood you share, but by the sacrifices you are willing to make for one another. And a true legacy isn't what's left to you, it's what you build from what you're left with. On the battlefield of life, your greatest arsenal is your truth. Your strongest shield is your chosen family, and your most powerful weapon will always be your honor. A small, genuine smile touched my lips, a smile of peace, of strength, of a war finally won. I was ready for whatever mission came next. My mission is complete, but my story is just one of many. The greatest truth I learned wasn't found on a foreign battlefield, but in realizing that we all have the power to forge our own family, our own legacy, from the ashes of our past. This channel is a gathering place for stories of that same strength and resilience. If my journey meant something to you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join this community. And I have one final mission for you. In the comments below, tell us the name of just one person who has been your Maria or your Ben, your chosen family. Let's honor them together.